name is Tim Miner. I am the co-founder and creative troublemaker at Charlotte is Creative, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that works to connect emerging makers, artists, and creators with the resources that they need to be creative entrepreneurs and small business. Why does that qualify me to be in this room? It does not at all. Not at all. But my organization and me personally, we are friends with the folks behind Share Charlotte, Carben events, and UNCC. And I have been, in the work that we do, and I'm sure it's not astounding for you to hear that artists have a great interest in not only the built environment, but the natural environment. And so we've had the opportunity to work in one way, shape, or form, either through a small promotion or a project with these individuals and the organizations that they represent. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I've talked enough. What I would invite you to do is we're going to work really hard, even though time management is always difficult in sessions like this, to leave around 15 minutes for questions. So please do write down questions, get ready to speak to these three amazing panelists. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tee them up a little bit, and then we'll have an opportunity for them to each, before we get into the questions, talk about why they're excited to be here. So thank you for coming to Getting Public Space Right, why public spaces are important to sustainability. Our panelists are all folks that get their hands dirty. These are not theoretical individuals. These are not people that wonder about what the environment is like, or sit in labs and don't get their get their uniforms dirty. All of them are people that get down every day with the folks that are creating amazing spaces in our community. First, we'll start with Erin Chantry. Erin is the Division Manager of Design and Preservation for the City of Charlotte's Planning, Design, and Development Department. Erin has been with the city for 8 years, where she has practiced urban design and planning at Charlotte's incredible Urban Design Center. If you have not been there, please go. It's kind of like the Willy Wonka of placemaking. With a BA in architecture and an MA in urban design and an MS, that's a lot of letters, in urban planning, Erin co-established the placemaking program at the city and has spearheaded the integration of public space design and traditional infrastructure projects. Next, we have Beth Poovey, who's the president of the board of directors for Partners for Parks. Beth is the president of this all-volunteer board, and she splits her time between advocating for parks and open space and working as a practicing landscape architect. Partners for Parks has been an integral advocate for promoting and enhancing parks, greenways, open spaces, active plays, and recreation since 1996. And finally, Chris Matthews. Chris is the division director, Division of Natural Preserves and Natural Resources with Mecklenburg County's Park and Recreation. He's a Charlotte native, so now you can say you've never met one before. And he served on several Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation citizen advisory groups since the mid-90s. He has a BA in biology from UNC Charlotte, so he is a Niner as well as a unicorn. And an MS in applied ecology and conservation biology from Frostburg State University in Maryland. Chris is responsible for management, strategic planning, and operations of the division, which incorporates Mecklenburg County's nature preserve system, environmental education, outdoor recreation, and natural resource sections. So now that I've done that, you guys know they know what they're talking about. These are the folks that do the work that are at the tip of the spear when it comes to our community. So I'm going to ask you guys, starting with Erin, what are you excited to get into and talk about today?
Sure. Well, I'm always excited to talk about public space. I mean, it's my passion. It is why I do what I do. I think that, from the seat that I sit in, it doesn't always have to cost a lot of money. It doesn't always have to take a long time. And I'm all about the low-hanging fruit. And especially as a way to really honor the character and identity of our places. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
So thanks. Beth?
I am really excited to be here with these two, right? To think about the relationship between the county and the city and how they can work together in public open space. and not, I think it's just really interesting to understand that dynamic and what how working together in the future can really improve our public open space. I'm also really interested in thinking about and talking about sustainability and how the impact of public open space and community really helps influence the sustainability of our parks and open space system, that the community and their understanding of that's super important. That's it.
Chris?
So having a biology background, I think my real focus is on the natural environment. You know, just to tell a really quick story, my dad was hired by Bonnie Cone personally in 1964 as one of the first biology professors at UNCC. So I kind of grew up doing this. And having grown up here in Charlotte, it's changed dramatically since when I was a kid. I grew up kind of near East Meck High School, and I clearly remember the city limit sign on Raymond Road. So living here in this really great city where everybody clearly loves to move here for a variety of reasons, you know, that's taken a big toll on our natural environment. So doing what I do now is like super important. It's part of my, I don't know, DNA, I guess, as you would say. And so I'm here to be a big advocate for kind of that aspect of our sustainable communities.
All right, well, one more group question, and we're gonna jump into this. Beth, we'll start with you. What brought you into the work of preserving land, developing spaces and placemaking? How did you get into it, and what's kept you in that line of work, both professionally and in your personal life?
Okay, so my day life, I am a landscape architect at a firm called Land Design. I got into landscape architecture because I like gardening. Had no idea really what landscape architecture was. I just knew I liked to garden, and there was a point in time where I have a degree in sociology, and that's not very. It was really hard for me to get work that was sustainable. So I needed to go back to school, and I'm like, oh, well, I'll go to school for that. And then I ended up as a landscape architect, learning how it's very different than gardening, but. So studying landscape architecture really is about public spaces. It's about our built environment. It's about all kinds of things, land use. And so that helped me, that I'm very passionate about that. And so I spend a lot of my time volunteering and being an advocate for our community.
Erin, what about you? How'd you get into this life?
Sure. Well, I grew up wanting to be an architect and was really interested in the history of my neighborhood. I'm also from Charlotte and grew up here. And, you know, quickly when I got into practicing architecture, I realized I really didn't care about a shower detail or a balcony detail. I really cared about everything that was around the building and the community and the people part of design. And so when you really, when you put together community and people and design and cities, right, that really led me to urban design and planning. So I eventually made my way there. I stayed at the city and I'm so happy to be at the city because there's nothing better than being a public servant and doing what you love and what you're passionate about for your city and where you grew up and where your parents grew up. So yeah, it's an honor every day.
Chris, you shared a little bit about how you got into it. It sounds like it was partly that you didn't really have a choice. But you have a choice now. So what's kept you in this line of work?
Yeah, I think I grew up in the parks. Parks were an integral part of my childhood, and we'll get in. I think the next question we'll get into a little bit more
Absolutely.
about.
I'm leading you right down to it.
So,
He's writing the notes, everybody. It's good.
So, you know, I think just growing up and knowing how important the parks were for me, I think I'm just trying to preserve and enforce that parks are important for everybody else.
And so exactly in that line of thinking, what are some, because you've been in it your whole life, what are some of the most important evolutions you've seen in how our community addresses public land and green spaces across the county?
So, back in 1992, I had an opportunity to work. My dad had a contract with Mecklenburg County to do actually, I think better standing up. So is that okay if I walk around?
There are no rules, man.
Awesome. So my dad had a contract with Mecklenburg County to do the Natural Heritage Survey for Mecklenburg County. The Natural Heritage Survey is a survey that is kind of promoted by the state of North Carolina to look at all the natural areas in individual counties. And they've done them for all the counties in North Carolina. So as a field person, I guess basically I kind of did this before I went off to grad school. I walked almost every square inch of Mecklenburg County looking for cool stuff. And we identified a whole host of properties that had rare species, had rare habitat, had important geological features, and quite frankly, a lot of these became the basis for our nature preserve system. And so Mecklenburg County at that time, so we're going to talk a little bit, at least I'm going to talk a little bit about city and county and responsibilities throughout the day. So just a real brief history. Up until 1992, all the parks in the city of Charlotte were managed by the city of Charlotte. Mecklenburg County also had a park and rec department that was developed in 1974. And Mecklenburg County's focus was on big, large parks, kind of like a state park. So McDowell, Latta, Reedy Creek were like the county parks. And the city had all the neighborhood parks and the community parks and the rec centers and all that kind of stuff. Well, in 1992, the county and city governments like divvied up services. And so the county got planning, and the county got the police department, and they got the fire department, and they got DOT. And the county got human health services, the medical examiner's office, Louisa, which does air quality, water quality, and park and rec. So we got all the properties, all the park and rec properties, with the exceptions of the ones in the towns, were now Mecklenburg County's responsibility. So you can imagine having a system that's focused on big, large parcels along the water to protect air quality and water quality and passive recreation. And now all of a sudden, we're now responsible for all the playgrounds, all the spray grounds, all the rec centers, and all that kind of stuff. So in 1992, which was one of these really big years for Mecklenburg County, we were looking still at these large land holdings for passive recreation. So I think the big change that I saw during that time was the focus of the county really having to change. We had to focus on what our core mission was, which was protecting natural resources and providing outdoor recreation more passively. And then combining all of the very active recreation like you would see at Matthews Sportsplex or Freedom Park or all that kind of stuff. So I think the biggest challenge for the county throughout that time was not only supporting its mission for passive recreation, but also trying to figure out a way to meet the active needs in the local communities. And we'll talk a little bit about TPL and how that affects it a little bit later, but I think that's been the biggest change, at least in the time that I've seen with the county, and how they've really had to manage two really different systems and trying to incorporate it into one.
Beth and Erin, from your perspective, from the work that you do with the city and you know, as a volunteer or as a third party outside, you know, nonprofit group, what are some of your times that either movements or changes or attitude change that you've seen that are really significant about how we handle public space?
Sure. Well, you know, as Chris was saying, the city didn't focus on public space for a really long time, many years, because we did not have a parks department. And as we've really gone through massive growth, I mean, we can look out the window and see it, right? So much growth, so much densification around our transit system and our centers. Open space became more, has become more important and more talked about and more desired from the community. And so when we were leading a lot of infrastructure programs and doing engagement around those, like our comprehensive neighborhood improvement program or our corridors of opportunity program, whenever we go out, we hear, we need more open space. We need more space to join as a community. We need more places to gather. And in our purview at the Urban Design Center, we very much focused on small spaces under an acre. We usually cobble it together through leftover right away from a intersection project or a city-owned parcel, or there's so much publicly owned land out there that goes underutilized, and so we find it and we use our funding to create place there. Usually we focus on neighborhood centers or where there's more commercial area as a place to celebrate community and really as a way to highlight the identity and character of these places that are drastically changing. So in the last 8 years that I've been at the city, we're paying attention to public space. It has to be part of our growth. We're just doing it in a very different way than Park and Rec does.
And I think from the third party looking in, like you don't necessarily know that there's two different entities taking care of our public open space or planning it. But the importance of public open space since COVID, right? The understanding that even these small spaces or even your neighborhood park, how impactful they are on people's quality of life, and having everyone being able to have access to that is something that I think we're all much more aware of, is how important it is that there's equity and access to quality spaces. So we can talk about that more as we go along, but just that the importance of even the small neighborhood parks and how important it is that every neighborhood has access to quality places.
Well, I want to pick up on something you brought up a few minutes ago. It's come up as a theme is again, we've got a large metropolitan area that is cared for by a large city government and a very large county government. But the average citizen doesn't know who does what. You know, we have Queen City Quiz Show that we do, and I've got a section called City Mouse or County Mouse, and we throw out a service and we're like, who does this? And the average correct, it's about 30% of the answers are correct. So what in that environment, why is the work that you do at Partners for Parks so important? What do you add to the environment in a system that's kind of bifurcated like this?
I don't know that I mean, I think that we played a role of supporting events that these two entities are working on together. So like Open Street 704 is something that they both worked on before. The way that Partners for Parks has gotten involved in that is that we started in 1997. So coming out of just the change of in 1992 of having the split system, there was there was a recognition that there needed to be a nonprofit as a source to collect donations. So a lot of folks, you can donate to the government, you can make donations to the government, but a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't feel comfortable doing that. So Partners for Parks was developed as an organization that you could actually, a nonprofit that you could make donations to. So we hold over 50 funds of privately donated money that's dedicated to certain pockets. So you can give us a check for $10,000 to improve a basketball court. We hold that, and all of that money goes straight to that. We don't keep any of that. So that was the reason why Partners for Parks was started. What we do now is really advocate also. So we have all that fiduciary responsibility, but we serve as advocates to talking about why it's important to have public open space. These folks can't really do that as their staff positions at the city and the county. So you need a friend to tell you why they're so important, and why, if there's a bond referendum or if there's an opportunity to talk about budgets, why is that important to fund? So we're really now doing a lot more advocacy, and then any sort of supplemental thing we can. We do not spend any of our money on what their core mission is, but we try to supplement that, whether that's through giving scholarships to kids to go to different camps, helping with things like Open Street 704. We're recently made a land donation, so someone donated a big parcel of land to become a park. So we sold that to the county, and then the money we got from that, we put back into the investment in that park. So just different ways that we can help support build the system as friends, and understanding the needs of the staff, and believing that they're doing all they can do, and what can we do to help support that.
And I want to make note for you and for everybody that's listening is at the end, there'll be an opportunity for these fine folks to give you guys a challenge and say, here's how you can support in one way or another with your time, talent, or your treasures, the work that they all do. So let's just put a pin in that, think about that, or remember that yeah, this is a big environment that we all need to get involved. Erin, for you, you know, in an area like Charlotte Mecklenburg, development has been, we'll say, booming. Why then is your placemaking work? And as you noted, often much smaller, more intimate, community-based spaces. Why is that so important to building and honoring communities as we move forward? And then there's a second part, which is, again, speaking of development, how are you seeing those developers either get on board or not get on board with the work that you are collectively doing?
Sure. With tremendous growth comes tremendous change. Displacement is something that we're seeing in our neighborhoods and our communities at a pace that I've never seen over my lifetime in Charlotte. I mean, it's just happening really, really fast. And there's only so many tools in the toolbox to manage that. And I'm very sensitive and aware of not only the displacement of people, but the displacement of culture and identity. And in any public space enhancement we do, it's always designed with the community, by the community, and we always involve local artists, hopefully from that neighborhood, to include art and expression within that public space. And so when you really see your role as a facilitator of design and shepherding the design, but have every element in that space or every piece of artwork in that space really represent the community that is there and the history of those places is something that we take really, really seriously, because the identity of our city is shifting a lot. I mean, I don't think it's the case anymore, especially because of like the great work that Charlotte is Creative is doing. But like in the 90s, this was like the most vanilla city in America, right? Like, oh, vanilla's really nice. Everybody likes vanilla. You know, it's shiny. It's, you know, the banks have made it a great flat, you know, whatever. But like it was vanilla, right? And so I think that part of our work that we really see is like, let's make this as rocky road as possible, you know, like let's bring in what makes this city special. And we are a very hugely diverse community. So let's celebrate that, and let's celebrate that through open space and art in our built environment, because there's so many ways to do it. So all of that is really, really important when you're having all of this change happen. And to answer the second part of your question, you know, there are developers who call me now being like, so how do you do this? Like, can you help me? My boss is telling me I got to go paint this mural now. Or, you know, like we need to, you know, there's even some of the development that's happening adjacent to some of our parks are recognizing the history of where they sit and want to express that through public space programming and enhancing that with public art. And so I definitely see more of an awareness, even requirements and rezonings around open space and art and placemaking. You know, 10 years ago, the word placemaking wouldn't have been in a rezoning, and now it is. And so I think that there's definitely more of an awareness and more of a expectation from the development community and the community around open space and placemaking.
Step out of the role of moderator for just a second. I want to add to that. You know, while it's not universal, I know there are some developers I see in the room, and from the Charlotte's creative perspective, we are seeing that too. That there's a willingness to say, how do I leave this place better? How do I create community space? How do I engage artists? We're definitely feeling that more. But I would specifically like to call it a placemaking program and say that in addition to the work that you do to create community spaces and keep people places to gather and celebrate and commiserate, you are often a really critical step. The work that you offer to individual artists in Charlotte is a very important step in their development as a small business, as a creative entrepreneur, that you provide opportunities to folks that maybe haven't quite made it yet, but to be able to say I've worked on a project for the city of Charlotte is a significant moment in their career. So for that, thank you.
Thank you.
Beth, Chris, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
I would just add that I think that the work that Erin's been doing over the years has made a big impact in our community and very thankful for it also. I think that on the developer side and thinking about parks and open space, one of the things that, other than just having it, right, having the quantity of land, activation of those spaces is so important. And I think that the development community is someone who understands that, right? They understand how to help activate public open space, as well as what Erin's doing. So that's adding another layer. Having a public park that no one goes to can actually turn into a nuisance. So making sure that we're activating those spaces is a key component that the development community, Erin, and Park and Rec are all working on.
Yeah, I think I would say, you know, when it comes to land, Park and Rec, competes with the developers for the same kind of land. Right? We want flat land too, so we got stuff we gotta build. And too often in our community, historically, we got the leftover stuff, right? The stuff in the floodplain, the rocky stuff, the hilly stuff, which makes sometimes for a good park, but sometimes not, right? You know, when we built Romare Bearden Park, $700 million worth of investment came after the park was built. When we built First Ward Park, $400 million of investment came and more is coming. If you think about some of the most expensive real estate on the planet, it's adjacent to Central Park in New York. So developers really need to consider how they're going to be coordinating with the city and county in these open space opportunities. And instead of putting them on the side or in the back, maybe they need to be in the front and maybe they need to be in the center, because that's really what provides quality of life.
I would also be remiss if I didn't say that over the last year and a half, especially with Charlotte's Creative, we've had the good fortune to be able to put emerging artists to work in Mecklenburg County parks. We just did a project last week at Sheffield Park, and we had 20 different artists participate in it, either doing something that was ephemeral or something that is a permanent addition to that park. So thank you for that as well. That's important. Well, continuing on that, you know, you talk about the importance, right? So, Chris, last week, and this is not something that's new, Charlotte Mecklenburg, you know, I want to move beyond the soundbite. There you go. That's why I wanted you here. Charlotte Mecklenburg came in at 87 on a list of 100 on the park score ratings from the Trust for Public Land. So this is something that's been floating around out there. I heard it at a county commission meeting 2 weeks ago. Why is that? You know, they're saying the areas, you know, we scored low because most residents don't live within a 10-minute walk of a park. Are other communities measuring differently? Are we not as committed? Why is that stat something that kind of hangs around?
Okay, so I'm gonna burn the whole rest of the time.
Get comfortable,
Talking about
everybody.
this topic. I'm probably
You
gonna have to
probably
say
should.
it. No, I'm just kidding, but this is an important topic and we'll probably spend a little bit of time on this. So I'm a scientist and I'm really comfortable with data, okay? And so I've done deep dive into TPL, and I do it every year. Every year the TPL score comes out, Chris Matthews closes his door and he's gone for like 2 weeks because I'm scrubbing data. And I think the TPL story is an interesting story. We're not up here to lay blame about anything. I'm just going to talk about some of the facts. Here's what I've been able to figure out from TPL. I'm probably like off the camera, so I may have to move in here. So TPL does really, the score, communities that score well on TPL are really dense, right? So if you look at the top cities, super dense population, Washington, DC, Arlington, Virginia, Minneapolis, like these are real dense places. Charlotte Mecklenburg is not considered dense. We're actually considered low density. So there's a difference there. One of the things I found a couple of years ago was, so there was a study done in 2017 by a professor in Northwestern, and he looked at street network organization. and he did this thing called a street histogram. Have you heard about this? So what I did was I looked at the top 100 cities in the United States and how organized their street network was. And I compared that to the TPL score. And guess what? The top cities that score in TPL have a grid network for their streets. You want to guess where Charlotte came in for its street network organization? Last. 100 out of 100. We're just not a walkable city. Our city grew in a way that it just didn't happen, right? And so TPL, they have a metric that really favors dense cities with an organized street network. And we're just not that, right? We're just not. Erin talked about how planning and the park department, when we split up in 92, city didn't really think about parks. Parks didn't really think about the planning department. If we were to rewind this, we should have kept them together, right? Parks and planning should have been together the whole time. That way parks could have been part of that whole development equation. It just didn't happen, right? So we had 30 years of unbridled development, right? That resulted in the park department not being able to keep up. And so what I would say is, and I'll give you an example, Arlington, Virginia is number 5, I think, on the TPL score. They have, their largest park is 96 acres. Our largest park is 1,500 acres, Latta Nature Preserve, right? They serve 245,000 residents. All of our park departments together serve almost 2 million people. To run an urban park system is really expensive. And so when, they'll talk about, how much average is spent per capita, and, the access thing is a huge thing for TPL. So is equity, and access and equity oftentimes are married together. Bottom line is, we're just never going to be in Arlington, Virginia. And the TPL score is great, but it doesn't really tell the full story of Mecklenburg County. We're not going to be able to rewind time and go back and put parks in all these places. It's just going to be way too expensive, and we can't do it. I look at the TPL list, and I'll name a couple of things here. If you look at the data, we're actually number 14th in the nation for community gardens. We're 13th in the nation for paved trails. We're 21st in the nation for nature trails. We're 12th in the nation for fitness and exercise zones, and we're number 1 for disc golf. And we're number 2 in the nation for average park size. TPL the news doesn't really want to talk about all that stuff, right? Because it's not like sensational, right? But our park system is really good. It's just that the way TPL measures things, we're just really never ever going to be there. We can add amenities, we can add bathrooms and dog parks and all these other things, and we'll creep up the chart. But it's never going to really affect our numbers all that much. The other thing is when we're compared with all these dense cities and their spending per capita, I think it's unfair. So what I did was I went back and I looked at the top 15 cities with the largest park systems that are considered low or medium low density. And when you run the numbers again, we're like number 10 compared up to all of those cities, right? So I think the only thing that I would say is our per capita spending, either way you look at it, is below average. You can get the private sector. We'd love to have Bank of America and Lowe's and Nucor and all these people come in and provide funding for the department. That would help. If we could find some more money in the county budget, that would help. If Erin wants to give the county $30 million so we can get our average up, that would be great too. But that's really the only way that we can improve our score, is to invest in the park department. So TPL is great. I mean, there's lots of great metrics in here. It's just that the way they score things and how they weight, it's not ever really gonna truly reflect how our park system is actually created and exists.
Thanks.
I mean, we can like, I could sit here all day and nerd out on this, but it's so true that the boom of our population and development of our city happened during the suburban movement and how we develop in America. And so, I mean, there's sustainability issues all over the place because of our disconnected street network. And, you know, once the consequences of a disconnected street network really became apparent to everyone, the city started putting in things in place through development regulations, through the subdivision ordinance, and there are requirements for connectivity now. But it's a project of generations to reconnect our street network. And so you can't get to 10 minutes to anything, much less a park. I mean, you're absolutely right. Also, like, the city and the county got to get together and on data, and maybe they do, and I don't know, but like on what gets submitted too, you know? Because I know that our tree canopy preservation program is actively buying parcels of land in urban areas, and the placemaking program is working to enhance those to make them not just for trees, but for people too. That should count, you know, that should absolutely count towards that score. So there's lots of ways that, you know, that we can, as organizations, can partner together. I think that the reason why Partners for Parks work is so incredibly important is because there isn't, and Beth, you could probably talk to this better than I can, but there doesn't seem to me to be philanthropy in Charlotte around public space. It's just not something that people give a lot of money to. In other cities, there is a lot of money that is given with philanthropy space to public space and to parks, and it's not the same here. And that really needs to change, and that's why advocacy organizations like Partners for Parks is so important.
Yeah, I would agree that we do not have a history of large philanthropy giving to public open space in Charlotte compared to other communities. It's not happening yet. I do think that, just to get back to TPL, I think that it's really, when we use data, which we're using more and more, it's really important to have that, and it's really important to be aspirational. But it takes some time. It's important to go back and look at the data, because bad data gives us a misperception of what's going on. So we need to spend time sharing that story, but we also have to be aspirational to fix all the things that we've done so that our city can have great things. And we do have great things. We have an awesome parks department, and we need to be able to talk about that more. But we also need to be able to think about the city infrastructure, so the streets and the sidewalks, as part of that open space system. So that 10-minute walk, right? Even if it's 20-minute walk, it feels like it's part of a park system. So our walkways, our sidewalks, streets that the city's in charge of can feel more like a linear park also. And we have seen that there's a lot of investment in trying to make ped and bike facilities better and more separated from our vehicular traffic, and trying to weigh how we connect to the parks much better. And so we got to continue to do that work. We can use what we learn from TPL and strive for better. Even if we were number one, we always have to keep striving to make our community the best for everyone.
Well, continuing on that thread then, Beth, I'm gonna throw it back to you. Chris just mentioned, at the end of the day, spending is critical. And we are in that season, right? We're in the budget debate season. What stays in the plan, what gets cut out of a plan, you know. And Chris talked about this a little earlier, but why are investments in our parks, greenways, and community placemaking projects so critical? And I want to do that with an eye towards, you know, populations that don't often get talked about. That, you know, historically marginalized populations, and then the younger members of our, you know, millennials, Gen Z, and the people that are moving into Charlotte. Like, what are they talking about? Why this is so critical that we spend this way and invest in these spaces?
Well, I think that folks who are coming in from another community, they've had a different experience, and maybe they have a better grid system, so they've had a 10-minute walk. And I'm from somewhere else, that is very suburban, and then I lived in other places that were very urban and had that experience of being able to walk and bike to public open space. So people coming in from outside, they've had a different experience, and they want to, share that, and they want to have more than what we have right now. For Partners for Parks, everyone who supports Partners for Parks gets it, right? So what we're hearing is, yes, invest more, invest
You're
more.
getting the people that get it.
Yeah, it's all you, right? You're all folks who get it also. So when I think about preaching to the choir, it's really about trying to think about, is it philanthropy that's gonna solve our problem? Do we want to leave it up to philanthropy to solve our problem? There's gotta be a lot of different tools that we use to increase our investment in public open space. So one is the budget, right? We do not hear enough from people saying, I want more parks. Parks are awesome. When you talk to the county commissioners and city council and the county budget folks, they're not saying, they don't hear that. So what they're hearing is we need something different, or we don't want our taxes to increase. So those of you who care about public open space, you gotta use your voice. You have to say, I need more of this. And so that's really, really important. And then I think the corporate partnerships, right? As we're doing development, as development is happening, thank goodness we're watching more closely and trying to make sure that we're creating a system that's better connected and has investment in public open space. So it's through the development, it's through philanthropy, it's through using your voice and getting a bigger budget for public open space. And then even those like the time and donations are really important. So.
Can we throw art into, if you're reaching out to your county commissioner or your city council?
And art.
Can you throw art in there too? Awesome.
Yeah, well, what Erin is talking about is really important in the public open space that it is. We do have public art. And, one of the things that's so important is when we think about, I was recently at an art unveiling of Trail of History. So it was like the 12th sculpture unveiling. It was just last week. And I was in Little Sugar Creek Greenway. And so you think about the vestiges, right? You were talking, Chris, about we get parks or the leftover land is what goes into parks and open space and greenways. But it's critical also, right? So the greenways, the creeks that go through there. I remember that creek, Little Sugar Creek, for those of you who weren't around, you didn't know it was there for a long time. I would drive over it on my way to work, and I never knew that there was a creek there until it became uncovered. And then uncovering it, the investment in that we measured like 5 years after it was done. So 10 years ago, the public investment in that was, say, every dollar resulted in $10 of private investment. So that was a while back. What is it now? Like now they're still happening. There's still development going along the corridor of Little Sugar Creek Greenway, and then the investment of public art. That was privately funded public art. So the investments that we do make on the public side really do bring a lot more private development investment in good ways, not in bad ways, in really good ways.
Chris.
Yeah, so I would say, here's why funding is so critical for our particular system. When you look at, and I'll go back to TPL, when you go back and look at some of these other cities that score really well, a lot of them have state parklands or federal parklands. So you think about Washington, DC, they include the Lincoln Monument and the Washington Monument, Rock Creek Park, which is like huge, right? Those all count toward their score. We don't have any state lands, and we have no public federal lands here in Mecklenburg County. So all the park system is left up to the stuff that the city's doing with placemaking, the parks that the county's doing, and the 6 towns. That's it. We don't get any help from anybody else. So that's why funding is so critical for us. You look at a city like Dallas, Texas, their average per capita spending is $140 per resident, and I think ours was $110 this last time. 25% of their funding comes from corporate. Anyone want to guess how much funding comes from corporate per the TPL score for Charlotte Mecklenburg? Goose, 0, right? So even as an artist, I think there's more focus on corporate support for arts. It just doesn't happen here for parks, right? And so that's why it's so important for people to let decision makers know that if they really want to continue to have this great park system, it takes dollars to make it happen.
Before we move to questions from the audience, Erin, anything you want to add?
No, I get so little money from
No.
the city. I just learned how to be very strategic and rely heavily on partners and other city infrastructure projects. I'm just piggyback onto what I can.
You're kind of a wizard when it comes to.
All right, well, we have about 10 minutes, because I do want to give them a few minutes to each wrap up, but yes, please, I saw a hand right there. I got you, go ahead.
Question. So, we've talked a little bit in the opening remarks, downstairs about how climate change is impacting the most vulnerable populations. And I know in other cities and states, there are different efforts that go along with climate change and tax that specific area. So like in Arizona, they have a chief heat officer specifically uses public space to create shade or different splash areas. I'm just curious if there's anything that Charlotte or Mecklenburg County is doing with that goal and that motivator in mind.
How about all your nature preserves?
Well, yeah, so there's a couple of things. So we're actually working with some researchers now to look at the heat coverage in Mecklenburg County. So we're going to be looking at, they're going to be doing some studies, transects across the county to look at the various heat sources, like which communities are the hottest. And hopefully that, I mean, I think we probably pretty much know where they are. But that's going to help us with our efforts to purchase and redevelop properties. And it's interesting, and this is important. In our urban areas, we're not going to be able to buy land and build a park anymore without tearing something down, right? And that ain't cheap. That's really expensive to do. And when you talk about some of these areas with affordable housing, we don't want to go in and tear down a bunch of affordable houses to put ball fields up either, right? So it's this real delicate dance that we're having to do to try and figure that out. So we're looking at some of our high heat areas within the city and the county to see if there are ways that we can help improve that situation. We're always looking for opportunities to plant trees. We work with Tree Charlotte and Creeper Leaf, and Charlotte Water has to plant a bunch of trees. Stormwater people, I see Caroline back there from Mecklenburg County Stormwater. We're always looking to try and figure out ways to plant trees. I think the biggest thing that we have, at least for many parts of our county, is the nature preserve system. We have over 8,000 acres of land just dedicated to wildlife, water quality protection, air quality, and tree canopy. I work closely with Tim Porter in our urban forest, in the city's urban forestry division, and we're trying to figure out ways to partner. We got money, we just got to figure out ways to work together so that we're not at cross purposes, right? So there's a lot of things that are kind of sort of happening, but I think our biggest challenge is going to be this kind of central core area. Some of our priority communities in the Crescent, which is like North Charlotte going down east. Those are areas that, quite frankly, some of them are very park rich, but the parks are old, and some of them are very park poor, and we just got to figure out ways to get parks in those locations.
I'll also add,
No, go ahead.
okay, I'll also add quickly that I mentioned the tree canopy preservation program. Our new unified development ordinance, which is about a year old now, has a really big focus on trees and preservation of our tree canopy, which has one of the very largest effects on heat island effect. And so Tim Porter's group in urban forestry, when a developer buys out of a tree preservation requirement, that money goes into a fund. We use that fund to buy property in urban areas to replant the urban tree canopy, and part of kind of where we buy those properties goes into where there's a lack of open space, because we're able to partner and turn that into an open space. So we just recently finished Spring Street Plaza, which is in the Greenville neighborhood, which is in the Crescent. And we got a grant from Lowe's for just $300,000. So for $300,000, we essentially built a small park, a small neighborhood park that has an orchard that has, is preserving and rebuilding our tree canopy preservation. So we work closely in that space.
Good, sorry, I didn't mean to rush you.
No, you're good, you're good.
I know we've got a little bit of time. We've got a question here. We'll try to get for it. So we're gonna go here, there, and there. If that's okay. All right.
Okay,
go ahead.
I live in a neighborhood in Charlotte that has a lot of flood prone partials, and in fact, Stormwater Services has bought out a lot of those partials. And I know that there's restrictions as far as what can be done because it's a floodplain. They don't connect to the greenways. Is there ways that those can be more used? I know that, I think the county owns those, but they're in the city. I know that then there's a whole argument in the neighborhood. Well, if we do this, then everybody's gonna come. We don't want everybody. We want the neighborhood. So any enlightenments or possible answers?
So I guess what I'll say is, we get that a lot. We don't want a lot of people coming into our parks, but you know, parks are for everyone, so eventually you're gonna have to get over that fact. We are working with county stormwater on some opportunities to be able to either start managing some of those floodplain buyout areas or figure out ways to connect them up. Caroline, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I will say that the county has an initiative to look at converting 5% of those parcels every year for some sort of environmental and community benefit. So we're kind of tackling it, and every year we have a goal of converting 5%. So it's just maybe when you guys get to the cycle of your neighborhood, but we're looking at opportunities to increase, you know, stormwater detention, wetlands, for environmental benefit, planting trees, pollinator fields. So we're evaluating and strategizing on that, working with the city and the urban tree planting program as well as Carben Rec. So we're developing a plan for how.
I think one of the biggest environmental benefits for places like that is the community understanding of what's going on, because if you think about the understanding where our water, how our stormwater works and how you're impacting that in a negative way. I know you want to keep people out, people seeing and understanding the value of those spaces has such a big impact on our environment.
All right, right here.
So one thing that I've been curious about, our greenway network falls up under parks. But for me, like, I actually live really close by in one of the few parts of Charlotte that I actually would consider, like, I can bike to 90% of my needs in 15 minutes. One of the very few areas, and I have to be very specific about that. But our greenways that I rely on to get to Target and Trader Joe's for groceries, they flood. And, you know, because they're under parks, it's a lot easier, I think, to treat them as like optional things, like the Little Sugar Creek Greenway between Freedom Park and, you know, that construction zone. Like, I used to go to Freedom Park probably 2 or 3 times a month. I can still get there, but it's now once every other month or two because it's vastly less convenient. And I actually just thought about that while I was sitting here, how much less I didn't even realize it because I just can't get there as easily. And so for me, it feels like that should be those kind of things, the greenways, the connectivity should be treated more like we treat our road infrastructure, and like the seriousness that we take. Nobody would shut down Kings Drive in that same exact section for 2 years and say, there's a 3-foot sidewalk over here. How do we work on improving that since it falls up under this area?
Well, I think advocating, right, and we do need to do exactly what you're doing is talk about it like infrastructure. Our parks are not an amenity, even, our greenways are not an amenity, but parks aren't either. They're part of the city infrastructure that everyone should have access to no matter where you live, right? So if you have access to water, same thing. It is part of it. I call it green infrastructure, but it should be funded and everyone should have access to it. So keep talking about it the way you're talking about it as part of infrastructure.
Super quick, our Greenway Trail infrastructure is a byproduct of Park and Rec getting leftover land.
Is your question related
Oh, yes.
to it? Do you mind if I follow up your question? Okay, fine.
So mine is more related to the urban heat island effect. And part of that can also be caused by the infrastructure of the buildings. Well, you see, most of our buildings in Charlotte are almost like mirror lakes, so they can refract heat. And then that heat stays, plus the addition of harmful chemicals like carbon monoxide from our cars. And all of that goes up to create a smog. But we don't want that. And I was thinking maybe if we could possibly change the infrastructure of our buildings to make that more sustainable, then we could probably have less of an urban heat island effect, plus the addition of more green infrastructure as well.
Yeah, I'll just say that in our UDO, our City of Charlotte Office of Sustainability was very integral into its writing, and the green building rating systems, or multiple, are included as they're not requirements, but they are options, and using them, you get other development bonuses. So they are integrated into our UDO, which is I think a great first step to address what you're talking about. But of course, yeah, there's a lot of development, so.
We've got about 2 more minutes. I want to make sure we get your question. Is there anything else you guys would like to add? I think it's coming up, advocacy again. You gotta advocate some things that you want. Yes. Thank you for your patience.
So one thing I recently from the main Charlotte was they were in South End and they said the whole area looks like it was done by the same developer. Charlotte has a lot of culture, and a lot of that is shown through our art and through our infrastructure and kind of how we do that. But we also have a lot of people who live in the area. How do we keep the culture of the neighborhood so that our neighborhoods are looking the same? I mean, Noda, for example, was always, of course, a neighborhood full of art, and now the apartments are starting to kind of look more the same. What are we doing to kind of keep all that culture?
So I guess we'll have to frame this through the lens of the work that y'all do versus zoning and architecture. So from parks and from placemaking, how do you work to keep that community personality and variety alive?
We don't do anything without the community, and we make sure that we are addressing long community standing members who have been leaders in those communities for quite some time. And they're very integral, and our co-designers and everything we do. We make sure that we work with local artists, we have a local creative artist pool that we pull from, not a national, for that reason. So we're really intent to use the toolboxes that we have. I mean, the places that you're mentioning, I will just say, is because all of that development happened really quickly around investment in transit. When you have something like transit and rail in the ground, that is a huge catalyst for development, and that development happens really quickly. And so that's why they look the same, because they're not, they haven't been developed over long periods of time. It happened very fast around an intentional investment in transit.
I would say we have a robust public input process too for our parks, which is why our parks aren't cookie cutter parks. We try and take advantage of the local community to help us steer how that park's gonna look.
So from your perspective though, is when they have these community engagement sessions is going and speaking to it, right? There's often, they'll have these sessions where you can go and give your opinion, but there's 15 people there. So making sure you go to these meetings and asking for what you want.
I would add, and we are over time, obviously, because we have 3 incredible individuals and you guys are so into this.
we are in that season, so I'm gonna wrap up. We throw one challenge out. If this is where you think that the city and the county's attention should be, from a financial standpoint, from a policy standpoint, from a planning standpoint, can't be silent. You gotta bring other people with you. To the point that Erin made, between these three incredible people, they probably know all of you in one way, shape, or form, so there needs to be more. How do we get the folks that are not as passionate as you are to join the chorus? So if you guys, we sing into the chorus, this chorus needs to get bigger. And Monday night is a big night for the city's budget. If you think there needs to be more money geared towards what Erin and placemaking does, or you're there, you need to say that. Same thing with the county. And what I would just say as a personal point of privilege, I've been in and around this, I've lived in Charlotte for a long time, not as long as Erin and Chris have. But I'm in an argument constantly with my wife, who sees government in a very different way, because she doesn't work with the people. She sees it as a monolithic, organization that it's impenetrable. I have the good fortune of working with the people, of getting to know the staffers at Park and Rec and the staffers at placemaking. And if you haven't had that opportunity, meet them, encourage other people to reach out to them. A human being will reach back out to you and listen to you. And I don't know what it's like in other communities, but I could say, I'm not trying to be a homer, but I want to give you guys your flowers. The people that work in Park and Rec, the people that work at placemaking, I know the people behind Partnership Parks care, they want to listen, they want to help amplify your voice as well. So thank you for being here today. Let's give these guys an incredible round of applause. And when they throw out the call for a public conversation, come and bring people with you. Invite people. So thank you very much.
Oh, no problem.